In May 1945, as the war in Europe was drawing to a close, thousands of German soldiers were surrendering across the continent. Many were young men, barely out of their teens, caught between fear and relief, carrying with them months or years of indoctrination about the enemy. They had been told what to expect in captivity: harsh treatment, humiliation, and even cruelty. For some, this expectation had become almost a part of their identity, a lens through which they measured every step of the approaching Allied lines. Among these men were those captured in the final days of the fighting, soldiers who had seen the destruction of their towns, the collapse of their units, and the quiet despair of civilians around them. They had been trained to fight, to follow orders, and to mistrust. Many had grown up on stories of the Allies as cruel, unfeeling, and relentless. And now, they were about to face them directly, stepping into a reality that would challenge everything they had believed. The journey to captivity was often long, filled with uncertainty and tension. Men marched for miles under the summer sun, some still in their uniforms, others in tattered remnants of what had once been proper attire. They moved in silence, speaking only when necessary, each step heavy with both fear and expectation. Diaries from this time show how constantly their minds circled around what might await them. One soldier wrote in June 1945, "We have been told that surrender is a disgrace and that the enemy will make us regret it. I do not know if I am afraid of them or if I am afraid of what I have become in preparing for this surrender. Every step feels like a choice I cannot undo."
This sense of anticipation was not limited to fear alone. Many carried hope as well. Some hoped for humane treatment, for food, for a chance to recover from years of exhaustion. Others, conditioned by propaganda, held their doubts tightly, imagining every possible hardship they might endure. The contrast between what they expected and what might actually occur created an inner tension, a quiet, constant stress that few outside their ranks could understand. Preparation for surrender was often as psychological as it was physical. Soldiers were instructed to gather their personal effects, to leave behind weapons, and to form orderly lines for inspection. Yet even these procedures carried uncertainty. Would the Allies treat their compliance as cooperation or weakness? Could a single mistake lead to punishment? In letters sent home from temporary holding areas, soldiers described a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. "We line up as we are told, watching the soldiers approach. I feel a knot in my stomach, as if the ground itself is uncertain beneath my feet. I want to speak, to explain that I am not a threat, but the words do not come. Only silence." For those who had spent years fighting, who had been trained to act decisively and with confidence, surrender introduced a new kind of vulnerability. The psychological weight of dependence, of being entirely in the hands of another, was unlike anything they had known. Diaries from prisoners in May 1945 often reflect the contrast between expectation and reality, even before the first encounter. One soldier recalled, "We were told they would be cruel. We were told to expect nothing. And yet I cannot stop imagining the moment when we meet them. Will they shout? Will they mock? Will we even survive the first hour? Every moment stretches longer than it should." Even as they approached Allied lines, many German soldiers attempted to maintain a sense of control over their situation. They checked their uniforms, organized their papers, and rehearsed their posture. There was a careful performance in these moments, an effort to meet imagined standards that might ensure their safety. Yet beneath this performance lay a pervasive anxiety, a quiet, gnawing question of what awaited them. The first encounters with Allied soldiers were often surreal. Many German POWs had imagined scenes of brutality and discipline, yet the actual moments were strikingly different. Soldiers recalled being met with calm, measured instructions rather than shouting in anger. They were guided to temporary camps, offered water, and sometimes even small comforts that contradicted every expectation they had formed. These early interactions planted the first seeds of surprise, though most were too cautious to acknowledge it. Propaganda and rumors had shaped perceptions long before these men ever laid eyes on Allied soldiers. They had been told that surrender was dishonorable, that those captured would be treated as less than human. Some carried a quiet shame at the thought of being taken prisoner. Others clung to the belief that resistance, even in its final moments, was preferable to capitulation. These beliefs created an internal friction that defined the initial experience of captivity. A soldier from northern Germany wrote, "I had been raised to believe that surrender was the end of all honor. Yet, as I stand here, waiting for the next instruction, I realize I do not feel the hatred I expected. I am confused, and I do not know if this is weakness or clarity." The camps themselves were organized with meticulous care. The Allies had learned from experience that orderly administration could prevent unrest, reduce stress, and even ease tensions among prisoners. German soldiers, conditioned to expect chaos and cruelty, observed this order with suspicion. Lines of tents, regular meal schedules, and clear rules seemed almost unbelievable. Many felt a quiet dissonance between the chaos of war they had just left and the calm of these controlled environments. Food was often a particularly jarring element. Soldiers accustomed to scarcity and deprivation expected meager rations, sometimes only the bare minimum to sustain life. Instead, they were often met with meals that, while simple, provided nourishment and choice. Diaries and letters frequently describe hesitation in accepting these meals. Some soldiers paused before eating, almost fearing a trap. One wrote, "We are given bread and soup. I do not understand. It is too much, yet not enough to satisfy the mind that expects cruelty. We eat slowly, unsure if this is kindness or a trick." This tension between expectation and reality created a profound psychological effect. Soldiers were forced to reconcile years of indoctrination with the simple truth that the enemy could act with humanity. The contrast was stark. The chaos of battle, the rumors of brutality, and the careful, deliberate calm of the camps existed side by side in the minds of prisoners. Letters sent home during these early weeks often reveal the internal struggle. Many tried to convey their experiences without betraying fear, shame, or relief. One soldier wrote to his family, "I cannot explain it fully. We expected torment, yet we find order. We expected anger, yet we meet patience. It is confusing, and perhaps that is the hardest part. To reconcile what we have been told with what we see is a task beyond words." Even small acts of consideration from camp staff left deep impressions. Soldiers remembered when a guard would pause to answer a question, or when medical personnel treated minor injuries without complaint. These moments, though minor in the grand scope of war, were significant because they directly contradicted expectation. They challenged the psychological narrative the prisoners had carried for years. Letters and diaries also show how fear persisted alongside these moments of surprise. Many soldiers still worried about punishment for perceived disobedience or about the treatment of those who might be left compliant. They were acutely aware that trust had to be earned and that the slightest misstep could carry consequences. Yet even in this tension, the recognition of human decency began to take root. As weeks passed, the routine of the camps continued to challenge assumptions. Soldiers discovered that following rules often led to fair treatment, that cooperation did not result in humiliation, and that simple kindness could coexist with the strict discipline of military organization. Each small realization chipped away at the fears that had dominated the months leading up to surrender. Observations from the time reveal a quiet awe at the efficiency and calm of the Allied system. German prisoners often compared it to the chaos of their own retreats and the desperation they had witnessed in their towns. The contrast was not lost on them. One wrote, "In the towns, we saw walls crumbling, fires burning, and people running without direction. Here, there is order. Men move with purpose, yet there is no panic. It is a strange relief, and yet I cannot help but feel the weight of what we left behind." Even as they adapted to camp life, many soldiers carried internalized doubts. The psychological adjustment to captivity was not immediate.
The expectation of brutality had been drilled into them for years, and learning to trust or even accept kindness required time, reflection, and observation. Small details, a polite gesture, a calm instruction, a clean meal, accumulated, challenging ingrained beliefs. This period of observation, anticipation, and quiet adjustment set the stage for what would become a profound realization that humanity could exist even in the midst of conflict, and that fear, expectation, and belief could be upended in the most unexpected ways. By the time they had settled into routine, the prisoners had already begun the internal work of reconciling their indoctrination with their lived reality. Part 1 ends with this tension unresolved. The German POWs had crossed the threshold into captivity, stepping into a world that was both familiar and profoundly different from what they expected. Their beliefs, their fears, and their assumptions were being tested in small, cumulative ways. They had not yet fully grasped the depth of humanity they would encounter, but the first moments, the small observations, and the quiet reflections had already begun to open their eyes. The first weeks in captivity had been a quiet tension, a careful balance between fear, expectation, and observation. By June 1945, many German prisoners were beginning to understand that the reality they faced was unlike anything they had been told. The strict routines, measured orders, and surprisingly humane treatment of the Allies created a new kind of confusion. It was a confusion that slowly opened the door to reflection. One of the first shocks came in the simplest forms. Food, which had been scarce for months or even years, was now available in measured but sufficient amounts. Bread, soup, and occasionally fruit were served in orderly lines. Prisoners had been conditioned to expect meager rations or worse, humiliation during meals. Instead, they found plates set before them and guards waiting patiently while each man ate in silence. In a diary entry from a Bavarian soldier, he wrote, "I cannot believe how simple it is to receive food without fear. I wait for something to happen, a shout, a shove, anything. Nothing comes. I eat slowly, unsure if it is right to feel this relief." This was not indulgence, it was structure and care. Guards ensured every man was accounted for, that the sick received attention, and that routines were followed. But for prisoners whose experience of authority had always been linked to punishment, the calm efficiency was disorienting. Many wrote home, trying to describe what they saw. "It is not kindness as I imagined it, not friendship, not pity. It is fairness. I did not know such a thing could exist in war." Hygiene and medical care provided another layer of unexpected reality. Prisoners were issued clean clothing, allowed access to showers, and examined by medics when needed. Soldiers who had been accustomed to the mud, lice, and exhaustion of the front lines paused in disbelief. A soldier from Saxony wrote, "I have not had clean socks for months. My feet feel strange, almost foreign. A guard watches, making sure I do it properly. There is no anger, no ridicule, only expectation. It is confusing." The psychological impact of this treatment was profound. Men who had been trained to anticipate cruelty found themselves questioning long-held beliefs. They began to see that their fear had been shaped by propaganda and wartime habit, not by the actual character of the people around them. Small moments, a guard offering extra water on a hot day, a nurse tending to a minor scrape, became symbols of something previously unimaginable. Letters from prisoners reveal a growing awareness of shared humanity. Some wrote about the surprise of seeing young British soldiers, themselves barely older than 18, calmly managing hundreds of prisoners. Others noted the absence of mockery or scorn. In June 1945, a soldier from Hamburg recorded, "I see them laugh quietly amongst themselves, yet never at us. We expected taunts, threats, or anger. None come. I am not sure if I should feel grateful or ashamed for expecting the worst." As days turned into weeks, prisoners began to explore the boundaries of this new reality. They were allowed small freedoms, walking within the camp, speaking quietly with fellow prisoners, even writing letters home. In these letters, the tension between past belief and present experience became evident. I have been told all my life that surrender is disgrace. Here I am treated with dignity. It is a strange weight to carry, honor in captivity. I do not yet understand it. One particularly striking aspect was the way guards handled conflicts or misunderstandings. Instead of responding with immediate punishment, they often sought explanations, mediating disputes among prisoners. German POWs who had expected harsh reprisals were shocked at the patience and fairness. A diary entry from a soldier captured in northern Germany reads, "Two men argued over a blanket. I waited for shouting, perhaps even a beating. The guard listened, calmly, then spoke. Both men received what they needed. I could not stop staring. I did not know patience could be so strong." Beyond the physical comforts and fair treatment, there was a more subtle, almost imperceptible lesson. The Allies were human. They were not monsters, not the ruthless figures painted in wartime stories, but people performing difficult duties with discipline, fairness, and sometimes quiet compassion. The psychological adjustment required of German prisoners was significant. They had to reconcile fear, shame, and ingrained propaganda with this new, undeniable truth. The diaries and letters also reveal moments of internal reflection. Some prisoners wrestled with guilt, not for their service, but for the assumptions they had held about others. A soldier from Bavaria wrote in late June 1945, "I had believed them cruel because it was easier than imagining they could be fair. To accept their humanity is harder than any battle I have fought." The camps themselves became a microcosm of this unexpected humanity. Daily life involved routines, inspections, roll calls, meals, and small tasks. Each interaction offered a chance for observation and reflection. Prisoners began to notice patterns, how orders were given, how mistakes were handled, how basic needs were met. The repetition of fairness and order slowly dismantled expectations of cruelty. Some letters home show that even small gestures left lasting impressions. One soldier recounted an incident where a guard helped a man struggling with his coat, offering a quiet word of encouragement rather than reprimand. Another described a nurse bending over a prisoner's small injury, treating it with care and without judgment. These moments, while minor in the logistical sense, had a profound psychological effect. They contradicted years of expectation and created the first inklings of trust. Children of war, civilians displaced by bombing, and older men serving as auxiliary forces also shared in these experiences. Diaries show that even among those who had lived through extreme hardship, the treatment by the Allies was consistently humane. One soldier observed, "An old man, barely able to walk, is offered a seat and water. I remember the terror in his eyes when we were first captured. Now he sits quietly, watched over, not mocked. I cannot reconcile this with what I believed." By July 1945, patterns of psychological adaptation had become clear. German POWs began to develop a new internal narrative that human decency could exist even amid war, that fear and expectation were not always reliable guides, and that patience, fairness, and calm authority could coexist with military discipline. These realizations were subtle, often internal, and rarely expressed in loud or dramatic ways, yet they marked a profound shift in perspective. Many letters and diaries reflect an ongoing tension between relief and disbelief. Soldiers were still prisoners, still under control, and still far from home. Yet, alongside this reality, they were learning that assumptions about others could be wrong, that humanity could be found even in the most unexpected places. One Bavarian soldier wrote, "I think I understand now that fear is only one side of the coin. The other is observation. When you see what is real, not what you are told, you must adjust. I adjust, slowly, and it is not easy." By late summer 1945, some prisoners began to speak openly about their experiences. They wrote home, describing the calm, the order, and the small acts of kindness that had surprised them. They described guards who treated them with dignity, medics who attended without scorn, and routines that offered structure in a chaotic world. Even without dramatic stories of heroism or violence, these narratives conveyed a deep psychological transformation. Reflection became a central theme. Soldiers began to question not only their expectations of the enemy, but also their understanding of themselves. What did it mean to be human in a time of conflict? How did fear, propaganda, and indoctrination shape perception? Could trust be rebuilt, even temporarily, in the confines of captivity? Diaries from this period frequently explore these questions, often without providing answers, leaving the tension unresolved but deeply felt. For many German POWs, the lasting memory of captivity was not hardship or loss, but the quiet, unexpected demonstration of decency. A soldier from Hamburg wrote, "I will not remember the march, the surrender, or even the fear. I will remember the small moments, the careful eyes, the food given without insult, the hands that healed rather than hurt. These are the truths that endure." These experiences highlight a rarely explored aspect of war, that human behavior cannot always be predicted by allegiance or circumstance. Even in a context defined by conflict, the simple acts of fairness, order, and compassion left an indelible mark on those who had expected only cruelty. The shock of expectation meeting reality became a profound lesson in observation, reflection, and the quiet endurance of humanity. By the end of 1945, many prisoners had returned home or been relocated, carrying with them memories that would influence their understanding of the world for decades. Letters, diaries, and interviews from post-war years repeatedly emphasize the same lesson. The human mind can be reshaped by experience, even in moments that seem defined by fear and control. The shock of encountering humanity in unexpected places was transformative, subtle, and enduring. Ultimately, the story of German POWs in Allied camps is not one of heroism or violence, but of quiet psychological revelation. It demonstrates the resilience of the human mind, the power of observation, and the capacity for empathy and fairness to persist, even amid the machinery of war. In retrospect, the journey from expectation to reality, from fear to reflection, reveals a fundamental truth about the human experience, that even in the shadow of conflict, decency can endure, and the mind can recognize it when given the chance. For the German POWs of 1945, that realization came not through grand gestures or dramatic acts, but through the quiet, patient humanity they encountered every day. By observing, reflecting, and slowly adjusting to the truth of their environment, these men discovered a profound lesson: that fear and propaganda could shape perception, but experience could reshape the soul. In the most unexpected place, the hands, eyes, and routines of those they had been told to fear, they saw what they could not have imagined: humanity.